Whether you knew someone who was injured in the disaster or you just watched the events unfold on television, we are all forever changed. But how do we cope, pick up the pieces, and move on from this tragedy? Well, my next guest is going to tell us how. Please help me welcome Minister Pat Sampson, Associate Minister at Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church. Thank you so much for being here this morning on Crossroads.
You're welcome.
Now, Pat, a lot of us saw that, and, some of the people who may be lacking in their faith are saying, where was God when all this happened? Talk to me about that.
As I have reflected on tragedies and things that cause crisis, one of the issues that often comes up is, why do bad things happen to good people? And what I've discovered is that there is no satisfactory answer. No matter what the answer is to why, it doesn't reverse the reality of what has happened. But I think the other truth is that God is always present with us, whether we are physically or mentally or emotionally aware of it, because God is the Creator. And what I've determined is God loves people more than anything. And even when tragedy occurs, it doesn't mean that God isn't present.
Oh, that's so profound. And it's blowing me away this morning, because I have a problem. I'm in it because I'm in the news business. So I saw it as it happened. I took the calls from people whose family members were missing and they couldn't find them. They couldn't locate them. How can you find peace in all of that? There are people who are watching this morning and they may not even know anybody who was in the disaster, but they're having a hard time trying to find some peace. I know I personally can't sleep at night. How do you find peace in all of this?
My remedy for finding peace has to do with plugging into your faith tradition. There are things that go beyond our physical and our intellectual and our emotional capacity. And so when those things are out of whack, when our minds and our hearts are out of sync, we're in a point of being at disbalance. And I think that the reality for me is, I find that when I can turn to worship, even in the midst of the tragedy, that somehow for those moments of knowing that I am in the actual presence of God, something happens to that off-balancedness that occurs when life just doesn't make sense. So if there are things that people can call on, for example, like there are psalms that resonate in your spirit, if you have a faith tradition that believes that way, that can give you great comfort. It doesn't change the reality of the cause. It doesn't reverse the situation of the tragedy, but there is a sense of, I'm not alone. I'm not alone. And while I may not know how to fix it and adjust it and make it right for my own sense of comfort, I have to turn from trying to relying on my own capacity and on my own ability, and remind myself, and viewers remind themselves of who they are in the God that they serve.
Because a thing that I felt after the crash was a sense of guilt almost.
What was the guilt about?
The guilt was about, it could have been me.
Yes.
And I felt bad that, it could have possibly been me. It could have been my husband. He travels that way for work every day. It could have affected my family. So I felt a sense of guilt. And I've talked to several other people, and they say, it could have been me. And I feel guilty that it was somebody else. How can you combat feeling a sense of guilt that it could have been me? There, but for the grace of God go I.
You own it. See, I think one of the things that happens is when people have emotions and feelings and tuck them way deep under, it's almost as if those emotions, if they're not put out there and explored and shared, they'll appear to be under control for a moment. And then they put on new clothes, Sheletta. They put on new clothes and they show up in another situation. But one of the ways to deal with guilt is to own this is how you feel. And sometimes when I pray, I have to have these conversations with God and say, I'm just not I'm not liking this very well. It's not making me feel very well. And sometimes the only thing that I know to do at those moments is just lay it out. This is how I feel. Because in the presence of God, who's going to judge you? Who's going to say you're wrong for feeling guilty, that you are still alive and others are not on this side of eternity anymore? But to try to suppress those feelings and pretend like you don't have them, it is a disaster waiting to erupt in your being. And you think you're not sleeping well now? If you suppress those feelings and try to pretend that they're not there, they will erupt. They will show themselves in one way or another. Confession is good for the soul. Saying so is good for the soul, because then once you acknowledge your feelings, it's at that point that you can own them and begin to make progress from where you are. And don't be surprised that once you do that, and you think, yes, I've dealt with this guilt, that it doesn't come back again, because it will. Because the healing process is process.
Now, we were talking earlier, and Scott, our director up there, I think we have some video, some aerial shots, if we can show those now, Scott. You know, we're glued to the TV.
Yes.
I mean, we can't get enough of it. I was, at work watching it as it unfolded. When I got home from work, it's like I didn't turn off. I turned the TV on, and I kept watching the coverage. I kept watching the cars burning. I kept watching the people being pulled, out of cars, the children on the school bus that almost went down in peril. Should we try and turn away from these images? Do you think, Pat? I mean, it's a reminder, but should we move past the images to a recovery now within our souls to try to get past what happened?
What I would suggest is there is no single prescription, for lack of a better word, that works for everyone. I think everybody has to be able to assess for themselves when they reach that point where they are saturated. Because I think sometimes what draws us to the television and to the images is also about shock. It's almost, is this real? Did this really happen? Am I going to awaken and to discover that this is all a bad nightmare or a bad dream? And in truth, we awaken the next day to find out that it is reality. For small children, those images, for adults as well, those images are impacting our psyche. When we watch them and we take them in over and over and over again, it's making an imprint on our being. And so then the challenge becomes, what do we now do with that imprint that is on our being? When I first saw the news, I immediately began to pray. And I started to pray for the people who were lost, the people who were saved, the people who were bypassing, because it impacts all of this. This is not an individual tragedy. It's a community, a nation, an international event.
Pat Sampson, Associate Minister at Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church. Just profound words on a Sunday morning to get us up, get us inspired, and help us to think about what happened. We appreciate you being here.
Oh, you're welcome.
And you guys don't go anywhere. More on Crossroads is next. We are just dealing with the tragedy of the I-35 bridge collapse. We'll have more information for you after the break. Stay with us.